When your orchid stems have died off, it's a great time to repot. I'm Tanner the Planter, and this is the truth about houseplants. Let's see how crispy they are. When your orchid stems have died off, that doesn't mean that the plant has died off. If you've got green leaves, you are good to go. So let's do a standard repot right here. I don't like to repot my orchids when there's flowers on them. The shock of that repot can actually cause them to lose their flowers prematurely. So unless it's an emergency, I prefer to wait until the flowers have died off, and then we go into the repot. The first thing I'm gonna do is loosen the pot from the root ball right here and give it a nice little tug. Now this customer brought this plant in just for a standard repot, but what she didn't know is it's actually a little bit of a rescue because we have massive root rot right here. Look at this, how these are just peeling away. This customer says they water on a schedule. I never recommend watering your plants on a schedule, especially when it comes to orchids that are planted in this moss. This moss retains a whole bunch of moisture. You can be successful with it, but you have to be really careful on how frequently you're watering. You gotta make sure that you're watering not on a schedule, but when the plant actually needs it. So we need to remove all this medium. Ooh, there is a strong smell coming from it. If you guys have ever dealt with root rot, you know that it is a very distinctive kind of smell. Some people always say, hey, what does it smell like? Ooh, you can't describe it. It smells like root rot, and that's about it. Rotting, it smells like rotting. It's not pleasant at all. And you can see a lot of these roots are just peeling away. We are losing a whole bunch of them in this medium right here. So I'm glad that this customer brought in this plant to be rescued, because without it, look, we've lost, I don't know, 90% of the roots or so. We've lost most of the roots. So left unchecked, this plant definitely would have died, because without roots, this plant will not live. So we're almost there. Getting rid of all of our root system right here. You know, because this root rot was so severe, I'm actually gonna go an extra step and really try to wash away just all of the medium that came in contact with those roots, because we don't want that to transfer over into our next clean pot. Okay, I'm gonna go get a bowl of water really quick. Ooh. Okay, you can use a bowl of water, you can use your sink, a hose, whatever you have laying around, but I wanna get off all of this moss that is surrounding these roots right here. Again, I don't want any of that contaminated material coming into contact with my orchids and transferring over into the next pot. So a quick little swish around is gonna get you pretty clean on that front. Shouldn't take too much effort, and then we can move on to the next steps. I'm gonna move aside all this junky material. I'm really doing the most, I guess. I should probably clean that up so I don't have to smell it this entire time, but it is what it is. Okay, so there's a couple options you can do at this point. One, to kill all this bacteria. That's our goal right now, that we have it all bare rooted. And the bacteria is gonna die away. That bacteria that's causing this to rot, these roots to rot, is going to die away once all the roots have become dry. So if you want, just leave it out. Just set it out overnight on your table, whatever the case is. That's gonna completely dry out all the roots. That's not going to cause any decline with the plant, so feel perfectly comfortable just leaving it out. If you want to expedite the process, what you can do is grab yourself some 3% hydrogen peroxide. I know it's not available all around the world, but in a lot of places, this is very affordable. It's just like a couple of bucks, and you can get it at a local drugstore, whatever the case. Again, this is 3% hydrogen peroxide, and I'm just gonna spray this all over the roots. Trying to be as thorough as possible. You don't wanna miss any, because again, we're getting rid of all this rotting bacteria. Now, I don't dilute this at all. This is straight hydrogen peroxide. It's already heavily diluted. It's 3%, and I don't wash it off afterward. Once you're confident that you have it completely cleaned up, then it's time to go into our new pot size. Now, usually when you're repotting, the general rule of thumb is to go up in pot size 1 or 2 inches. But you can see we've lost so many of the roots. And if you've ever watched my videos, you know that I always recommend for your houseplants to only go up 1 to 2 inches larger than the root ball diameter. So even though it was in this size pot, I'm not going to increase the pot size because I've lost so much of the root ball. My root ball has actually decreased in size. So I'm either gonna stay in the same size pot or actually go backwards. In this case, I kind of knew that there was a little bit of root rot. I could smell it when the customer brought it in. So I actually grabbed one size smaller of a pot, again, because we only have a few roots here. Make sure that your pot has lots of drainage right here, and it doesn't need to be clear. I just like to have it clear. I'll tell you a little bit why at the end of this video about why I like a clear pot for your orchid and for a lot of plants really. And today I'm actually going to be using an orchid bark. You can plant orchids in a lot of different mediums. Moss, orchid bark, leca, full water culture is fantastic, or any mixture of the three. Well, maybe not orchid bark, leca, and water culture, but you get what I mean. There's lots of successful ways you can plant your orchid. I'm gonna be using orchid bark right here because this customer has a tendency to overwater, clearly. So I'm going to give her a chunkier material that's going to allow her plant to dry out faster than this really dense sphagnum moss that we have right here. So by knowing your natural tendencies, you can actually customize your soil recipes to fit your personality. It's kind of a neat thing to do. Okay, so all we really need to do is put our orchid roots inside of our pot right here. It's perfectly fine for them to be quite tight. Orchids need their roots to dry out quite quickly. They like a lot of airflow. They grow naturally on the sides of trees where their roots are constantly exposed to air. So if we can mimic that at all, that really helps us go a long ways in keeping the orchid nice and happy and healthy. So all I'm gonna be doing now is backfilling. There's nothing too special about this. I'm just trying to get all of the orchid bark in and around the roots. I don't want to skip any places. I want water to be able to contact all of the roots, which means I'm going to have to make sure orchid bark is contacting all the roots, because that's where the roots are going to be pulling the water from, is the wet orchid medium, the wet orchid bark. Filter it in and around here. Now with these roots that are so thick, you might have to get a little creative with it. Sometimes I'll even use a little chopstick to sort of guide the orchid bark in and around right there. That way I don't have to use my fingers. Sometimes my fingers are a little bit too fat for that. So we can just sort of guide it in there. And you know, if you really know what you're doing, you'll slap that pot. That gets all the orchid medium to settle in there as well. Sometimes it's not as effective when you have a really chunky medium like this, but for most soils it works really, really well. I couldn't leave you hanging on this one. I know I missed the last pot slapping and you guys came for me. I understand, I missed it. I forgot. I'm gonna try not to let you down again. Okay, we're almost there. Nothing too crazy. And I think we are right about there. You'll notice that some of the orchid roots are exposed right at the top right here. Again, that's perfectly fine. We want these orchid roots to have a lot of airflow to sort of mimic what they would get in nature. And now the last thing to do is sort of clean it up. We don't need to have these old dead flower spikes on there anymore. So we are going to remove them. Now sometimes when your orchid flowers die off, these stems don't die off, they remain green. So feel free to keep them if you want to. You do have a chance of them spiking again off the same green spike, but these have all died off. They're completely brown. They're not going to re-spike, so we can feel free to remove them. All you need to do, let's sanitize our pruners first. Whenever you're cutting on a lot of plants, it's a good idea to sanitize your pruners. I use rubbing alcohol for the sanitizing, and it's super effective. So here we go. Just follow the spike all the way down to where it comes out of the orchid crown right here, and give it a nice little snip. Follow it all the way down, give it a nice little snip. Now going forward, I'm going to recommend that the customer place this in a bright window, about 1,000-foot candles if you've got a light meter going on. And the reason that I like having this in a clear pot is because you're only supposed to water these orchids, the Phalaenopsis orchid, when these roots have turned silver. You can see that they're green right now, which means that they're nice and hydrated. When they've dried out sufficiently, they will be a silver color, at which point you can water them again. So the clear pot is really handy to be able to look, oh look, I've got silver roots, time to water my orchid, instead of watering on a schedule. By doing that, you can avoid root rot and have your plant nice and happy and healthy so you don't have to go backwards in the root development. And there you go, how to save your orchid from root rot. Don't forget when you're repotting your orchids to slap that pot and slap that subscribe button.